whole project 695, the Barberino Woodstove installation operation started really back early last summer when one of my good friends, Barberino, he had purchased a couple of houses with the intention of repurposing both of them, and one of them had a wood stove in it. He asked me one day if I had any use for a wood stove, and I said, "Man, are you kidding?" I said, "I've been thinking about putting a wood stove out in the barn for quite some time," and he said, "Why don't you go take a look at it? If you want it, you can have it." So I went over and took a look at it. Looked pretty good to me, and so he and I and a couple other friends, we took that darn stove out of that house and loaded it on a trailer. I hauled it out to the squirrel ranch and put it in the barn, and I guess the rest is darn near history. But anyway, then I built a hearth out of wood, a frame out of 2x6s, and shored it up in the right places to handle this big old heavy stove. And then I built or anchored it to the ground exactly where it needed to go. Bricked around the outside with some brick that we had from left over from our home when we built it. And then the flagstone on the top of it came off my mom and dad's house back whenever we did an extensive remodel on it about 15 years or so ago. And then that stove from Barberino, and all I had to do was go out and buy what ended up being about $1,500 worth of stovepipe. And since I didn't buy a kit, there weren't any instructions with it. I took measurements on all this and went to Spavinall Stove Company over in Gentry, who they don't know me from Adam. They'll probably never see this, but they were awful helpful. But anyway, got the parts from them. Took a while to get them because they're 8-inch, and most of the wood stoves made today, if not all of them, are 6-inch. Take a 6-inch pipe. So anyway, took a while to get all the 8-inch accessories. Finally got them. Brought them out here, and I had never installed a wood stove and the pipe and all the stuff that goes along with it. So I made numerous errors while I was doing this. If you ran across this thinking you would find out the exact way to put a wood stove in, there's probably better YouTube tutorials on how to do that. That's not why I put this little video together, but I'll tell you the mistakes I made. First off is I should have done a kind of a mock assembly of these parts ahead of time, and then really thought through how these go together, what parts go through the roof, how big, what's the best size for that hole to be, and all those kinds of things. And then also make sure you have all the right tools. I'm sharpening up an old pair of snips that my dad gave me that I think he's had his whole life. Those probably belong to his dad, my granddad. And anyway, so I didn't have any aviation snips, and I didn't have even one metal blade from a jigsaw. Ended up using my reciprocating saw, and I had an old raggedy bent up blade on it. Just about tore the roof off the barn getting that hole cut. Those old snips made in the US of A, B&B Tool Company. Probably went out of business long ago. Not too many American tool companies anymore, manufacturers. Anyway, so the biggest thing was I didn't do that. I didn't assemble all the parts ahead of time. When I cut the hole, I ended up having to cut that hole out twice because I was thinking it needed to be an 8-inch hole because I've got 8-inch pipe. But what I didn't take into consideration fully was that double wall pipe that extends through the roof line and above the roof line, that has a 10-inch outside diameter. So, and then the pitch of the roof is 412 pitch. That won't mean much to most people, but unless you're in probably building trades. But in any event, that hole, because the roof is not perfectly flat or horizontal with the ground, it's at a slant. That hole needed to be a little bit bigger than that outside diameter of that pipe that's going through it. So about 10.5 inches. So had I done that, thought that through, and then marked that hole for a 10.5 inch pipe. And then also I did all these, making that kind of a template there to mark it with that, using that duct tape and that connector piece, and went to great lengths to make sure I had that little hole in that duct tape exactly the right place. I almost messed up there. Almost that first hole I marked was in the wrong place. There was 2 holes that went through that roof. One I drilled, the other one was a screw I took out of there. So I almost cut the hole out in the wrong place. Tried using that grinder, was getting sparks inside the barn. I thought, man, I'm gonna set the barn on fire, which would be ironic, right? I'm installing a wood stove and I catch the barn on fire and burn it down. Tried Dad's snips. I didn't have those aviation snips, as I mentioned out there, and so his that corrugated roof metal was a little bit thick and so forth for those old snips. That recip saw, that darn thing about jarred my teeth loose. Again, if I'd have had a good blade, new blade for that, I'd have been set. But so anyway, those are the mistakes. If you're going to do this on your own, get the parts, and unless you buy a kit, you're probably not going to have instructions. Have a real good understanding of how all those parts fit together, what part of that pipe's going to go through your roof line. I didn't take into consideration that double wall stainless pipe needed to come down far enough inside the shop where that, I think it's 4-inch wide sleeve collar that goes around in a bracket that supports it. I didn't take that into consideration. I didn't fully understand how the connector between the single wall and double wall worked. Anyway, at this point here, I think I'm done. I think I got that hole up there and it's right. Everything's ready. I'm gonna wire brush this the old Barbarino here and get some rust off there so I can get a good seat on that stovepipe. And so I'm feeling pretty good. I get all that together and then I get up there and realize what I just shared with you, that that hole needed to be a little bit bigger, that I was going to have to cut that black pipe off so that outside pipe would come down through with enough room for the bracket and all that. So not complicated. If I were doing this again, I could probably do it, from start to finish in an hour and a half maybe, at the most. And I would only have to cut that hole one time and put that pipe up there and be ready to go. But anyway, that's the great thing about doing something once, is the next time you do it, you learn by your mistakes, and the next time you do it, you shave an awful lot of time off of it. So I'm not taking anything away from the wood stove guys. There's guys do this for a living. First off, I must have gone up and down that ladder literally 20 times up and down, up 20, down 20, maybe more than that. Partially because I was shooting a video here, moving that camera around and all that, which incidentally I've got a whole new appreciation for the folks that do these YouTube channels and that shoot them themselves, like I'm doing here. And it takes a lot of time to move the camera around, do all that stuff, not to mention edit all these video clips down, all that kind of stuff. But doing this for fun and having some fun with it, and I hope anybody who's watching it's getting a kick out of it. Some of you might say, why the heck's he wearing a gun? Well, I just like wearing a gun, especially when I'm out here at Squirrel Ranch, which is most of the time. I was a Cub Scout, not for very long, but long enough to remember part of the Boy Scout motto, which was to always be prepared, or is to always be prepared. At least that's what it was back in about 1967 whenever I was in the Cub Scouts. So always be prepared. Well, I like to always be prepared. Plus, I just like wearing a gun around out in the woods. It's fun. So fortunately, I made it through the whole day. Didn't have to shoot anybody or anything, and that's always a positive. And learned a few things. Definitely learned how to install pipe on a wood stove. Anyway, it was right about that time I figured all that out. So realized, measured it, I needed to take 5 inches off of one of those single wall pieces, and so I marked it, and using that red tape there, you can't see a black magic marker. Doesn't show up well on a black stovepipe, so I use that tape to get myself line of sight to cut that off. And here again, had I had a good jigsaw blade from a jigsaw, I could have cut that with no problem. It had been clean, and this old blade on that recip saw just beat the snot out of that stovepipe. It had dents in it, and it looked like it had been run over by a truck when I got done. Thinking about Dad, how Dad, he plans stuff all ahead, and he's got all the right tools. he'd have probably laughed himself silly watching me do all this. But anyway, finally got it cut down, and the cool thing about it is it gave me a chance. I needed to true up those corners of that pipe all the way around, get it back in shape in a circle, at least a partial circle. And so I used that old hammer belonged to my granddad, my dad's dad, and I'd never used it before. I've got it hanging up on the wall out there in the shop, and so that was kind of fun, and it actually worked really well. And then I took that pipe out and used a grinder to grind it down. Not quite factory, but pretty darn close to factory quality, and got that down so it'd seat well into the old Barbarino there, and not let any sparks or anything through. So that was no big deal, but that's probably the easiest part of the whole thing. That stovepipe grinds down pretty good. There's certainly not anything wrong with new stuff, but man, all things being equal, it's I kind of sometimes prefer stuff that's got some age on it, some character been used, and that old stove there has had a lot of fires in it. There's an old saying, if that old stove could talk, or maybe I just made that up, but in any event, pretty cool to think about how many times folks sat around that old wood stove and enjoyed the warmth and the glow coming off of it. Again, if I would have thought this through and put this together and measured exactly where all this was gonna come to, I could have saved a whole lot of time. But again, you know what? I might not have learned as much if it would have been real smooth. Going through kind of the trials and tribulations on putting it together, I'm pretty confident I won't forget. It'll be a long time before I forget how to do this. For anybody that ever finds themselves installing a wood stove pipe, that thing I'm putting on there, that support bracket goes around, in this case, that double wall pipe that goes through the ceiling and up above the ceiling line, and then you screw that to your roof trusses or supports or beams, whatever you're working with, and then that's what holds that your chimney pipe in place, keeps it from being moved around by the wind or whatever. I put that chimney cap on, and then I realized that I had to put that boot, that rubber boot on there first. So I took it off, no big deal, and not trusting the tolerances as marked on that boot there, that rubber boot I'm working with. It started out at 6 inches. That hole was 6 inches, made for a 6-inch stovepipe, which is what most modern day wood stoves take apparently. But I didn't know how stretchy that rubber was and how pliable, so I just took it off ½ inch at a time and got down. Ultimately, had to cut it to 10 inches, which is the outside diameter of that stainless double wall pipe. And but I didn't want to take a chance on messing that up, and then I'm kind of messed up because I've got that hole up there in the barn. It's going to rain here in a couple, 2 or 3 hours. It's almost dark. I don't want to be crawling up down that ladder and working up on a roof in the dark, so I wanted to make darn sure I got this second to the last step correct. So I was overly cautious, and now I did that. Took me about 2 seconds to realize I didn't want to take the time to custom fit that spark arrestor, that stainless steel net fencing there. They call it a spark arrestor for that chimney cap. I'll save that for another day. Anyway, last step was putting that pipe together, and then anchoring that boot down to the ceiling, to the top of the roof, I should say. Brett over there at the stove company told me I should screw that boot down put a screw about every 2 inches, and I did it about that or less. And boy, it just worked really well. With that standing seam, that kind of made it a little more complicated to get it sealed tight, just because having to go up and over that. And so you'll see when I get down there that rubber boot on there was a little bit muddled up, but it was watertight, appeared to be, and I put a bead of sealant, again, caulking around there. That was one other thing I needed, was either some roof cement or some, well, it wouldn't have to be clear, but silicone caulking, and I didn't have either. But I did have some good exterior caulking that I've used for a number of things, and that'll work for a while until I get back up there and seal that with some silicone. Running short on time, I just decided not to use that final piece there. That I think that's a trim piece, mostly for looks, although it would also keep the sun off of that rubber boot and probably extend the life of that thing, I would imagine. So I got that pipe caulked up, and you can see that pipe, if you look at it, is at a little bit of a slant. So I ended up going back down inside and loosening up that bracket and adjusting, moved that stove over just a little bit and put a level on it, got that pipe just perfectly straight, or close to perfect. And so I was pretty happy the way that turned out. Loaded all the stuff back up in the old Max and swept up the garage, and man, I felt pretty good. It just always feels really good to do something yourself, especially if it's something you've never done before, you weren't sure how to do it. And aside from having the satisfaction of having completed it yourself, learned something new, you save yourself some money, and that's always a pretty good feeling. Special thanks to my good friend Bob Barino for donating that stove, man. It's a dandy. Really appreciate it.